Hi everyone. Um, we'll probably start in a few minutes just to let everyone trickle in. Yeah. I think we'll get started now. Um, Hi everyone. My name's Janaru. My pronouns are he, him, his. Thank you so much all for being here. We're all incredibly grateful. Before we begin, I, with Express Media and VoiceWorks, would like to acknowledge that this event is broadcasted from the unceded stolen lands of the Darug people. We pay our respects to the traditional custodians of the land from which all our readers have come from and written in, and encourage you viewers as well to find out which Indigenous groups are the traditional owners of the land from where you are joining us today. We acknowledge that the First Nations people are the traditional custodians of this country, whose cultures are among the oldest living cultures in human history. We pay respects to the elders of these communities, past, present, and emerging, and extend this respect to any Aboriginal viewers here today. We recognize that sovereignty was never ceded and that colonization is an ongoing process. It was, is, and always will be Aboriginal land. Again, thank you so much for being here. As you know, this reading serves as a fundraiser for critical medical supplies for Lady Ridgeway, which is one of the primary public hospitals in Sri Lanka. I still remember from the beginning of this year when I'd always call my grandma over WhatsApp, who lives in Sri Lanka, and I'd ask her how things were and how the country was. And as I listened to her talk over the weeks, months, and then the year, I was essentially tuning into this slowly unwinding report of Sri Lanka's worsening economic situation. It was very difficult to hear about this, particularly as part of the Sri Lankan diaspora, but I can't even imagine what it's like for those still living back home. Coming off the back of the pandemic, this situation has had devastating impacts across the country, but of major concern is its detriment to the public health system, where drastically aggravated supply shortages and overcapacity has widened the gap for equitable access to healthcare. Sri Lanka has had a difficult history to say the least, but this event is a small act to offer some aid in this moment of national crisis. The hospital we're raising for, Lady Ridgeway, is quite dear to me. It's the hospital where I had my first surgery as a kid. Lady Ridgeway has been one cornerstone of equitable public access to healthcare in Sri Lanka, and this opportunity to give back is one that fills me with deep gratitude. As writers, we all believe in the power of literature as a catalyst for broader social change and dialogue, but at least for me, it's difficult to see the impact our work can have, particularly as writing, compounded by the pandemic, has been a solitary act. This event reminds us that the work we make at its heart is communal. It's very rare for marginalized writers to see themselves represented and reflected in the literary or broader community. But this event, surrounded by Sri Lankan writers, reminds me that I'm not alone. It's a very rare opportunity to curate a space for writers like myself, and to have been given this chance by VoiceWorks and Express Media is again something that fills me with indelible gratitude. Speaking of gratitude, I'd like to thank the people who made this project and reading a reality. Firstly, thank you so much, Zoe Douglas Kinghorn, who is the editor of VoiceWorks. Thank you for taking a chance on me when I emailed you with a very unprepared, haphazard, but urgent proposal for this reading. Thank you for being the one who emailed countless people, who called me to give guidance on what to do next, who helped me publicize this event, and who made this one of the very first poetry readings I've ever held a reality. Right now, Zoe is digitally backstage running everything technology-wise for this reading. This event sincerely would not have been possible without all your effort, the effort that you put in all the while preparing for the launch of VoiceWorks Grain. Thank you so, so much. I'd also like to thank Cecil Richard, who designed the thumbnail for this video and all the social media posts for this reading. They are an amazing designer who took on this very last minute project, and I'm incredibly grateful, as I am with all of VoiceWorks and the Express Media team. Thank you also to the amazing readers who are here today, those who pre-recorded their reading, and to those who could not unfortunately make it. You all inspire me greatly. Your work never ceases to move me to tears or joy and reassures me that literature is moving and alive, even for lives like ours. I'd also like to mention that one of our readers, Madison Griffiths, unfortunately couldn't make it tonight, but we are all very grateful that she was even willing to read for us in the first place, and we send her so much love right now. Before each reader will read, they'll answer a few questions about the work as an introduction, and in their introductions, I'll also read out a small bio of where you can find their other work as well. Hit it up, read everything they've written and produced. They're all amazing, amazing writers. Finally, thank you all for donating and watching live or later. I know our lives are very busy and chaotic right now, but to see you all attend is deeply moving. At the end, if there's time and enough questions in the chat, I'd like to open the chat for a roundtable discussion and Q&A with our live readers. So please, please, please use the comment section on our YouTube or Facebook, wherever you're joining us, to ask questions and send these readers a lot of love when they're reading. Please blow up the chat. And if there's time in the end, we'd love to answer your questions. Two more things before we begin. One, the donations for this reading will be up until December 10th. Again, donations are available on the Eventbrite page. We'd be incredibly grateful if you would be possibly able to donate. It's all a pay what you can system, so anything you can give or even sharing the page is very much appreciated. Lastly, I'd like to shout out that VoiceWorks is currently open for submissions for the upcoming issue Static. Nonfiction pitches are due this Sunday, the 27th of November. Poetry and fiction are due the Sunday after, on the 4th of December. And art, comic, and comic pitches are due on the Sunday after that, on the 11th of December. All submissions are due at 11:59 AEST time on their respective dates. VoiceWorks is such an incredible space, specifically curated for young Australian emerging artists. If you feel inspired after this reading or have some urgent work that you need to get out into the world, I cannot recommend highly enough submitting. As a guide, VoiceWorks says, remember, you don't have to stick to the theme. Our themes are a prompt more than anything else, a springboard to get the creative ideas flowing. Most of all, we just want good work. Without further ado, we'd like to begin this reading. First up, we have the incredible Devana. Dev is a journalist from Colombo. You can find a lot of her amazing work online and on her website, which is https://www.senanayake.com, and it should also be in the chat for this reading. Give it up for the brilliant Devana.
Hi.
Hi, Dev. How are you going?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Before we begin, I'd just like to ask you a few questions about your work and your writing, just as an introduction. So, firstly, for the piece you're reading, could I ask what's the name for it and what sparked the conception of this piece and more broadly your body of work?
So I called this piece Counterfeited Tongues when I first wrote it. And it was published in this journal called Going Down Swinging. It's not up at the moment anymore. Because I think they did something with the website, but they gave it another name. I'm reading my original draft, not the one that they published, because I feel like it captures what I was trying to sort of convey a little bit better. This sort of piece talks and touches on how uncomfortable I feel when I'm asked to do English language tests outside of my home country to prove my English proficiency. Um, I feel like English has been my first and my native language alongside my other one. But because I'm from a place which doesn't recognize English as a quote unquote official language, it sort of does. It's actually a link language. I constantly feel like I'm made to sort of prove that I can speak English. And a lot of people come and tell me, or used to tell me when I lived in Australia, oh, your English is so good. How do you speak such good English? It was very uncomfortable because I grew up with it, and
Mm,
I sat exams in English. I went to school in English, read in English. Everything I consumed was in English. So it was very strange proving that I have this proficiency. And it's
mm,
about the discomfort I felt.
mm,
It's also a little bit about how just because a country doesn't have English as an official language, um, doesn't mean that a lot of people don't use it. I know a lot of people here who speak English only, but they don't speak Sinhala or Tamil. They can't sort of communicate in those other languages. So it's a little bit about that.
mm. That's a very relatable experience, I think, for a lot of us, especially how you speak such good English. Yeah, that's very true. Another question I had was, how does form impact your work? What is your relationship to the form you write in?
So I think this was from 2019, and I was, writing quote unquote like creatively,
Mm,
and I just liked prose. But I also wanted to sort of. I'm also a fan of poetry, and I've studied literature as well. So I wanted to sort of do poetic prose in a form. So this sort of tries to sort of it tries to be that, yeah,
mm,
tries to merge those two genres.
Yeah, that's true. Language is like a very potent thing for us writers as well. So, incorporating that poetic language is a very like sharp, powerful tool. Um, what's the primary intent behind your work?
It's difficult to say because I don't write creatively anymore. I'm a
Mm,
full-time reporter.
mm,
Um, to be honest, I genuinely do really like writing and reporting about Sri Lanka. We had the Aragalia, which was these unprecedented people-led protests. And what I like doing is I sort of like capturing moments, whether it's talking to people on the ground, talking to experts, and writing about it in a way that a lot of people can understand, so it's accessible. And that's what I really like. I never really had this connection to Australia when I lived there, unfortunately. So I've never been able to write about Australia in the same way. I can only write about Sri Lanka in that very sort of intimate and personal way.
yeah, you're a journalist, right? So,
Mhm.
how does or at least when you were doing creative writing, how did your work as a journalist influence the creative work you produce?
I see them as very distinct because for creative writing, it needs to come from within. It needs
Mm,
to come from your life, and it's very exhausting because you're constantly mining from yourself.
mm,
Whereas with reporting, it's about the world around you. There's an endless array of things you can write about. There is a sense of it being personal as well because you live in this space, you share the space with a lot of other people.
mm,
But it's with reporting, I think I enjoyed a little bit better because there's a chance to, without exposing too much about myself and without doing, some very exhausting emotional labor, I'm still able to sort of process the world and the experiences around me.
mm. That's very true. A lot of creative writing does feel very like close to yourself and almost like cathartic in a way. So I can understand how like the public world and the private self can be very disjuncted in your writing process. Yeah, that's all the questions I had for you. So then I'll let you take it away.
Okay. If there are any questions, let me know. Not questions, sorry. If there are any issues with the reading. Okay. Before I learned English, I heard several dialects of English. The language felt like a Sanra song, unfamiliar, unconstrained, and mutable. It could never be heard and just understood. Like a Sanra song, the language demanded special focus, dedication, and an unflinching submission from its audience. English had no connection to my mother tongue, Sinhala. As a language, Sinhala acted as a channel for expression and emotion. It's a language that transformed the mundane details of sun drenched bodies that sipped on black tea into evocative dramas. With it, life felt like the tip of a volcano, ready to burst open at any point. In her book, In Other Words, Jhumpa Lahiri describes encountering a foreign language, Italian, for the first time. I feel a connection and at the same time a detachment, a closeness and at the same time a distance. What I feel is something physical, inexplicable. It stirs an indiscreet, absurd longing, an exquisite tension, love at first sight. Unlike Lahiri, I did not love English at first sight. I understood that I had to learn the language, perhaps even master it, but I retaliated against this expectation for as long as possible. I hated feeling like I was settling for a path that had already been laid out for me. I like Sinhala, familiar, comforting, easy, like raindrops that fell softly from palm trees. It had emotion, a richness to it, and I could be vulnerable at all times. I hated English, cold, restrained, and bland, like red meat from a supermarket fridge. As children my age read billboards and magazine headlines in English, I refused to touch any book and preferred to lounge near my mother, basking in a friend's gossip. I had no need to repeat every street sign our car passed. I could stick to repeating everyone's marriage breakups and secret affairs by heart. I resisted and rebelled until the age of 7. Finally, my parents forced me into an all English school, and I had no choice but to accept the omnipresence of English. I struggled. I felt just like Lahiri did as she tried to master Italian. The language still seems like a locked gate. I'm on a threshold. I can see inside, but the gate won't open. As schools became more and more demanding, I had to use the language for complex purposes. I remember struggling to keep up with other children who could read their textbooks and put pen evocative essays and articulate complex opinions. I experienced a deep shame, but I could not do the same in this language that I continue to absolutely detest. The read text and I appeared to read text, but in reality I memorized the sounds and used the cadenzas as a string to plow through the dark road of a foreign language. One day, one of my mother's friends came and gave me one of her daughter's English books during a gossip session. I liked the pictures in it and spent some time trying to read the captions. After several hours of staring at the letters and saying them out loud, I managed to piece together the first sentences and understand it. I started the laborious process of learning to read alone. I had to really sit and learn the language, the grammar, the synonyms, the antonyms. I stumbled and the process hurt. But my absolute stubbornness kept me returning to it. Things started to change. Without my intention, my thought processes shifted completely to English. I dreamed and created in English. Without any consideration, my attachment to my first language slipped. It became a secondary language, one that I use only in close circles and for the purpose of connection, familiarity, and familial intimacy. I remember an English teacher I had the age of 13. She helped me break the rules of the language. She encouraged me to use and but at the start of sentences to startle people out of their reading comatose. She helped me translate the insights I had about people and their lives into colorful prose passages. She helped me structure the larger than life emotions experience into iambic pentameter. Without realizing it, I had found my voice, my literary voice, and it spoke English. The IELTS exam aims to gauge a person's fluency in areas such as speaking, reading, and listening for countries that primarily operate in other languages. As an adult, I found the experience of sitting the IELTS exam to be perplexing. The exam tried to represent my relationship to English through a simple score, a mere number, a mind numbing simplification. The examination failed to capture everything I had already accomplished through the language: a school education, a degree, a career, my closest relationships, the axiom that governed my daily reality. I had never sat the exam before, but finally succumbed to satisfy some visa requirements. I understood that the score I received would have possible consequences for my life. No one in Australia, in Europe, or in Asia questioned the relationship English and I shared. They just accepted it. To outsiders, it appeared active and in constant flux, a marker of a fully functional relationship. I did not prepare for the test. A lot of my friends reassured me of its simplicity. "Oh, you'll be fine," they said. I walked in and got an 8. I babbled through the speaking section. I felt like an imposter, like I was having an out of body experience. I heard myself speaking in English, a standalone language, rather than in my voice that naturally spoke English. For the first time in a long time, I heard my voice speak English as an outsider, rather than as someone that had an intimate relationship to it. The test pushed me outside and asked me to prove my capacity in a language I had not only familiarized, but had already made mine. I remember thinking, do not stutter, do not trip, do not make a mistake. This might cost you a grade. Ironically, I had these anxious thoughts in English and had to keep communicating in the same language. I absolutely hated the writing section. I had not sat a timed exam in years. The head of my course at university did not believe in exams, and thankfully so. Writing is a process. It's not as simple as sitting on a desk and putting pen to paper. Words are ideas that need to be thought about, reevaluated, renegotiated, sometimes completely negated, and then communicated. It takes time, and life has to pass through like a soothing river current, carrying the occasional pink salmon out to sea. I hated sitting in a chair and penning a letter in half an hour. Even as a journalist, my articles undergo several drafts before they are finally published. Each article represents my commentary, the thoughts of my sources, and the suggestions of my editors. The voices of multiple personalities are stamped and condensed together on one page. I do not have a distinct voice in Sinhala. I am not sure about the emotion it conveys or the sounds it holds. Would I be another person if I had a voice defined and rooted in my first language? In other words, Lahiri describes a black jumper she had misplaced during a solitary outing. The next day, when she woke, she saw a black sweater on a chair in the corner of the room. It was again familiar when she put it on. She preferred it. She didn't want to find the one she had lost. She didn't miss it. Now, when she put it on, she too was another. The jumper Lahiri had lost had been in English, and the jumper she found had been Italian. Similarly, the language I had lost had been Sinhala, but the language I found had been English. At this point, I realized I had fallen deeply into English and could not pull myself out of it. In fact, I had little to no need of pulling myself out of it. I preferred to stay enmeshed in it. I had no intention of turning back and retracing my steps. The section I hated the most had to be reading in the test. Felt like a maths or science test rather than a humanities test. I remember several multiple choice questions. Yes, a surprising setup for a testing reading skills. The section felt like it needed preparation. It never asked me to close read a passage and dive into its hidden depths and scourge secret messages rove to its foundations, or read a passage and respond to it creatively. The chosen passage felt bland, like they had been picked out of the back of a dated cereal box or IKEA instruction guide. It felt like a section I had to prepare intensely for and rush through it the timed period. I did not catch even the hint of feeling, sensory experiences, or personal transmutations. Perhaps the greatest surprise turned out to be my reading score, 6 out of 9, 9 being the highest. I read for leisure. I read at least 6 books every month. I bask in fiction, critical theory, and poetry. Books like Aliens and Anorexia incorporated all these genres, so I gobble them up like salted caramel cheesecake. I don't just love books, I'm a compulsive reader. At around 10, I started living through the boundaries etched by English. My life continues to be elucidated through the language, and this shall continue to be my faith. Though I did not fail the IELTS exam, I failed to represent me to an administration. could not even touch on the journey I had taken to learn another language and form a relation to it, so much so that it became my language. Even at a young age, I could feel that learning English came at a price. Learning the language called for transaction. What are you ready to sacrifice to completely learn the language? I thought that learning and mastering English meant that I could belong to it, but in retrospect, I have learned that I made a deal that cheated on me. Though I embraced English and even traded parts of my identity that defined me to learn it, the language and the culture it framed has failed to do the same for me. The tragedy of it all is although I am touched by both Sinhala and English, I belong to neither. I am an alien and a fraud in both languages, constantly being asked to prove my proficiency. Thanks.
That was amazing, amazing. Such a brilliant reading. Such an acute dissection of language. So thank you so much, Devana. Next up, it's Krishna. Krishna, who sometimes goes by Victor, is a Tamil Australian writer trying to prove the nature of belonging and the power of dynamics of relationships, such as the parent-child relationship. He has been published in Cordite Poetry Review, VoiceWorks, the Australian Poetry Journal, and the anthology Collisions, Fictions of the Future. He has won the Monash Undergraduate Prize for Creative Writing. Give it up for the luminary Krishna.
Oh wow, okay.
Hi,
Hello.
Krishna. How are you going?
I am good. Did not realize I would be so big. My head's so big. Okay.
No, all good. Yeah, I'll just start asking you some questions, the same questions I asked Dev. So what's the name of the pieces you're going to be reading today, and what sparked the conception of these pieces and the broader body of work that you produce?
Yeah, so I'm reading two pieces. My first piece is Mango, which was first published in VoiceWorks. It's the first poem I've published. And my second piece is called Small Talk with My Supervisor, which is a poem that was published in Cordite. Um, so I guess both pieces just tie into, I guess my work is more about exploring my own identity, just as Tamil Sri Lankan, Australian, or Tamil Australian Sri Lankan. I never know which words to put first and everything. Just because there is that, yeah, just because with the history of the war and everything, I feel like I have like a very conflicted nature with like the state of Sri Lanka, as well as how much do I belong in this country. Um, yeah, but yeah, so I guess Mango, which is my first poem, I was just looking up words that in English that had Tamil origins, and I saw that mango was one of them, and I was like, actually, I hate mangoes, which is very strange because every time I say that to a brown person, they're like, "Oh my God, like, have you not tried these mangoes?" Like, they're so passionate about mangoes, and I just don't get it. And I guess that just fed into my wider feeling of, just alienation from my culture, I guess. Um, and I guess my second piece, Small Talk with My Supervisor, I was like, small talk, you can actually make the text really small. So it works better in a visual setting because you see the size of the text. But it was just a way of like reflecting the power dynamics between like your supervisors and like I guess white Australians in general who like when they see you're brown they ask questions like, oh, where are you really from? And it's like it always puts me on the spot and I feel like, well, I don't really want to get into like a long discussion about my identity or like the complicated nature of belonging and everything. Yeah.
It's very true. Multi-hyphenated identities, it can be very
Yeah.
difficult to find out belonging in that liminal space. Yeah. Um, you talked briefly about how you experimented with font size and like the small talk. do you use traditional forms at all in your work, and how does experimental form shape the work, and what is your relationship to that form?
Yes, I guess what I really like about poetry is just the space you have to like experiment and move and just play with the English language and sort of deconstruct it. Um, I think I'd like to go for more experimental forms, but most of my writing's pretty traditional. I think small talk is very much an outlier. But yeah, I think like form, like line breaks, rhythm, like they all really like are a reflection of like your identity and how you like relate to language in general, I guess. Yeah, I don't know.
No, that's very true. Yeah. Another thing about form I've been thinking of recently is, I think it was Sucho, the poet, who said this, but the very landscape of the poem, it's very different to, essays and prose where, for essay you have to go through multiple pages, but the poem, it's right there. You are forced and confronted with the whole poem in one go. And I feel like when you break away from that like traditional like singular structure and have those like strange line breaks and experimental form as well, it makes it very charged, which I see in small talk, which unfortunately we can't like show visually, but
Yeah,
if you buy, it's on Cordite, right?
yeah.
So yeah, if you go on Cordite, you search up Krishna's name, you can see it. It's a very beautifully laid out poem. But another thing I wanted to ask you is, I think you touched on this already with your alienation to identity, but what could you perhaps expand a bit more on, like what's your primary intent behind the work you produce, maybe even towards audiences?
Yeah, I guess for me, writing has always been a bit of a more self-centered, maybe selfish endeavor. It was more a way of me just exploring, like, for example, my parents come from like a traditional Tamil Sri Lankan background, and then I'm raised in like a Western country, so my values are different. I cannot speak much Tamil, so there's like always that disconnect where I feel like, do we truly understand each other on like the same level? Um, and I guess, and it's weird when you're like hanging out with your mates in primary school, you don't really realize you have different colors and stuff. But as you grow older, you sort of realize how different people interact with you and how you look like shapes your experience of the world. And that I think my work is just a way of me exploring my discomfort or comfort as depends on the day, I guess,
Mm,
with like my identity and the different like force, like the different axes, the different definition, like the different axes of my identity, the different definition. And I guess I would also like to connect with other people who feel the same way and like share and like, because I think my experiences are definitely not unique. They're very much like second generation immigrant struggles. I'm very cliche. Um, so yeah, I would just like to contribute to the growing voice of like immigrants in like relating to their identity and defining who they truly are.
mm. I wouldn't say you're cliche. Like even though the experiences are shared, the way you write about them is very unique and very charged. So yeah.
Okay, I
And
was just wishing for compliments, I guess.
and if you wouldn't mind sharing, where can readers find more of your work, and what are you currently working on at the moment?
Um, yeah, so I guess like you mentioned, the places I've been published before. Um, uh, Most part of my short story, Suburban Graveyard, which was published in Collisions. I guess I haven't really written anything in a while because I've just been very caught up in work.
Yeah.
But next year I'm going to Sri Lanka for the first time in like 25 years with my parents. And I'm hopeful that will re-spark my artistic nature. Also, just writing stuff about like I don't know, just tarot cards and stuff because tarot cards are really interesting. I just got into them. Yeah.
And that's so true. A lot of poets use. I don't personally, but I know a lot of poets use tarot cards for as prompts. I think they're like sets with like different prompts, and those are really cool. Yeah. So just when you're reading Small Talk, the link to that poem will be in the YouTube and Facebook chat, so everyone can, maybe click on it and follow along as Krishna reads it. But yeah, without further ado, take it away, Krishna.
Oh, okay. Yes. So my first piece is mango. That's a mango. Yes. Thanks to I forgot who drew it, but they were like a very magnificent artist. Anyway, if you ever check the fruit basket of any Sri Lankan family, you will find bananas and oranges and apples. And at the top of this sweet, fragrant hill are mangoes, teetering and wobbling, ready to roll down the rainbow into grasping hands at the slightest exhale of a touch. Mango comes from a Tamil word, mange, um, technically unripe fruit. Kamadeva, technically Cupid, would twine his arrows with the leaves of mangoes to anoint them with love, their blissful taste, their indescribable stain on the heart. My dad would suck on the mangoes until the pulps coated his teeth, the color of summer leaves dancing on the dusk's horizon, their juices making his skin shine like shivering dew on grass. When my mum was tired, my dad would drive to roadside vendors and mounting their mangoes into his trunk before driving back, and he would place those sunset mangoes one by one into my mother's grasping hands. To be honest, I don't like mangoes at all. My parents would yell at me to eat them. They would leave dripping gold slabs on my plate and try to guilt me into eating them by saying that all the other brown kids like to eat them. But I preferred the taste of strawberries and peaches and grapes. Yes, that was mango. And I guess my second piece is small talk, which I brought up. I don't think I'll be speaking in like different volumes to reflect the size of the text, but the sizes of the texts are a bit different in this poem. Yeah. Hey, small talk with my supervisor. Hey, so I'm Victor and I'll be working with you today. Hey mate, where are you from? Where are your parents from? Oh, Sri Lanka, I've heard of that place. My son went last year on his holiday. Beautiful place. I've never been to Sri Lanka. Really? It seems like such a beautiful place. My son has the most beautiful pictures on Facebook of him riding elephants, ethically, of course, at dawn, with their trunks wrapping around the sun. So you've never been? No. Well, have you been to the north of the island then? They're still recovering from the war, and the military checkpoints can be a bit ominous at first. But my son says there's these beautiful abandoned beaches and waterfalls where it's just you and the silence and the world. Have you been there? No. Why haven't you been yet? Should I want to go to a place that doesn't echo with the breath of boys like me? To a place where the white vans drove in the dark to disappear boys like me? To a place that has tried its best to forget the once upon a time existence of boys like me? My parents never took me. I don't know why. Oh, that's a shame. You should go one day. Yeah, I will. So, what are we doing today? Mm, yes, that's it. That's the poem.
That was such a beautiful reading, such a pertinent reading, and yeah, very touching one as well. And again, you can find Krishna's work online and also Small Talk on Cordite online, where you can see the very cool formatting of the poem, which I think adds to the experience. Next up, it's the brilliant Wiki Elridge. Hi, Wiki.
Hello.
Hi. Just a
Hi.
quick intro. Wiki Elridge is a Melbourne-based Sri Lankan writer, Currently, he studies at Deakin University and is working on his thesis project. When Wiki is not writing, he spends his free time reading, cooking, watching Netflix, and mastering necromancy. Could you tell me a more about necromancy?
It's the whole, the branding name kind of a thing that, which actually that fascinate me into the creative writing industry is basically eldritch horror. So, and the fact that the Lovecraftian horror became with a racist and the kind of thing and the power to decipher that again and use it for our own benefit with our own narratives, it's just kind of what inspires me as a writer. So yeah, that's why I would say like master in necromancy in the sense of a literary sense, not like actual necromancy.
No, that's true. I think a lot of writing is like a form of resurrection, necromancy, uncovering what's often not at the forefront of social dialogue and like bringing it to the surface. So that's very true. But when I saw the bio, I thought it was, I will admit, I thought it was like actual
Yeah, it's quite
necromancy.
nice.
So I was a bit interested. Um,
I wish. Eventually, who knows? Eventually.
so what's the name of the piece you're going to be reading today, and what's the conception of this piece and more broadly your body of work?
Yeah. So basically, the two poems that I'm going to present today are not usually the things that I write. So these were one of like two of the submissions that I sent to the Worldly Online magazine. One called "Funeral for My Future Children," and the other one is called "A Place Called Home." So both of them have themes of homesickness and racial politics and things like that, which I usually don't tackle because I don't think that I am in a position to immerse myself in that kind of a narrative and bring it out in that way. Like but being here, being in Australia, even for a short period of time, like has given me the time to distance myself from that and just perceive it as an outsider, so to better understand it. So this these poems are just one of these like narrative points where I would just express how I feel about my country and how I perceive multiculturalism. Yeah.
Mm,
So I would just
yeah,
read it out there.
yeah. Dissecting
So the
politics, dissecting
hmm?
politics can be a very difficult and daunting
Hmm.
task, but your work does it very
Yeah.
well. Could I also ask, as a poet, how does form impact your work, and what's your relationship to form?
Yeah, so when I first started writing, I tried to rhyme and be very, traditional about it, follow the Shakespearean iambic pentameter and things like that. But it felt really restricting. So then I slowly transitioned into using free verse, and it's kind of a very freeing in a way because it's kind of like you use Freudian slips to trigger words. There's no writing block. You can say whatever you want. You can experiment with the form, and it's what I'm like experimenting with right now in a more broader sense, as in like even writing short stories using that, using literary textual formations. So yeah, I would personally prefer free verse over the traditional structure of poetry.
That's so true. Like, a lot of in the past, formalism and meritocracy has been used like a as a barrier to poetic entry. But yeah, I understand how free verse can be very liberating. Do you think you'd ever write in form again in the future,
Yeah.
or think you'd stick to free verse?
Mm.
Sorry, do you think you'd like possibly write in form in the future, or
Yeah, I might write when I'm writing like short stories or in the future. normal.
Mm.
I might, for my thesis, I have to be more. So I think I should just read my poem then, like.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this piece is called Funeral for My Future Children. So here lies the future generation, stillborn, unrealized, untapped potential, buried under the gravel of generational trauma, broken promises, blurred borders. Here lives the Sri Lankan youth, rotting out with tear gas and bruised politics, scrubbing toilets in foreign lands, hoping to start over, hoping for a better future. Thank you. And this one is called A Place to Call Home. I finally left home, a realm of pitchforks and nightmares, for a faraway place, a land down under. Still, violence lingered, yet I dared to dream, learn to sing and dance, to defy and rebel. You don't belong here, a stranger hissed. When asked why, he said, go back to where you came from. Where did I come from? Not meant to belong? Will I ever find a place to call home? Thank you.
Very probing poems, very experimental, and also looking into a lot of that intersection of the future and identity. So it was very brilliant reading. Thank you so much. So next up, we have our final reader, Christine. Unfortunately, Christine can't be here live, but we do have a pre-recording of her reading. So next up is Christine Shamista. Christine Shamista is a writer and poet. She lives on the land of the Wangal people of the Eora Nation in Sydney's inner west with her husband and 2 kids. Her writing has been published in Sweatshop Western Sydney's anthology, Racism, Stories on Fear, Hate and Bigotry, Sweatshop's Women anthologies, the Contemporary Asian Australian Poets anthology, and a number of journals, including 4W, Peril, and Mascara Literary Review, and also in Red Room Poetry. Please give it up for Christine.
Hi, I hope you're all having a lovely night. I'm Christine Shamista, and I'm honoured to be part of fundraising efforts for this hospital, where my parents once worked many, many years ago. And I hope the support it provides can reach those who really need it. And thank you again to this event's organisers. I'm a writer and poet. I often write of Sri Lanka and family. I haven't visited often since I left in the early 1980s, but I think of it often, and my connection with Sri Lanka is deep. Today I'm reading a poem published by Red Room Poetry, and you can find it on their website. It's called Sri Lanka Quietly Fades, and it was sparked by the Easter Sunday bombings in 2019. It shook me terribly, and I did what I often do when I wrestle with something. I started to write about it. And that's how it's been for poetry and me. I've had a feeling or an idea, and to help make sense of it, I start to write about it. Poetry is the truest expression, I find, and particularly with words. You can play with sounds, line structure. It's economical. How do you say or evoke something in a few words using similes, metaphors, sounds, imagery? I love poetry. I love the challenge of it. I love reading it and hearing it and definitely writing it. My main intent behind this work was to express my experience of the bombings, but hopefully also to show how a person is connected to this event, even if they're so far away. They can be impacted by it deeply and on many levels through that ancestral home connection, through the connection to people, even though living in such a different context, only hearing about it through patchy news, the reaction of it as a mother. I'm currently working on a collection of poetry, very much about my ancestral home of Sri Lanka, and my family, and particularly my matriarchy. I hope to share more about this in time. You can find out more about my writing and other pieces I have published on my Instagram, which is at @CShamista, which is CHAMISTA. I'll now read the poem. Sri Lanka quietly fades. Easter Sunday bombings. There are these moments when I feel the warmth of Amma's chicken curry and the cuddles given to me by my children. We're all squished together like a pan roll or three, with just enough spice in its filling and crunch in its crumbed covering. Motherhood in a time where bushes hide shiny foil wrappings, ready to explode Cadbury delights all throughout Easter Sunday dinner. Over water-turned wine, my tall, blue-eyed husband leans his face to my left ear, like he's just about to kiss me. Just a heads up, he says, instead. Some churches in Colombo have been bombed. I reach for my phone, shards of my children's broken chocolate Easter bunnies all over their kitchen counter. Crowned in Sunday best. A couple of hours later, chocolate explosions cleaned up, my children sleep. I'm sitting cross-legged on my couch, seeing image after image in the dark. Headline, more than 130 dead, with hundreds injured. Death toll to rise. Ashen grey smoke surrounds white buildings, brown bodies, empty streets. Militia guard the surroundings of popular hotels, heavily booked for hoppers, those says curries, eggs, fry-ups, East Asian soups, enjoyed by locals and tourists. I should know, I was there 2 years ago. Churches are now darkened, like my living room, but with the blackened smoke of charred flesh in faith. Before the bodies, with the same hue as mine, were crowned in Sunday best, in the light of a stained-glassed Virgin Mary. Fair-skinned Jesus. Headline, multiple bombs blast across the country, killing 290. Foreigners included in the death toll. Social media blocked. Wait to hear of loved ones. Wait among bloodied saris in disbelief. Headline, the death toll rises to 321. The white walls, the statue of fair-skinned Jesus in a toga-style white robe flecked with red. People are missing, limbs missing, babies, appas, amamas, chalams. Headline, TV celebrity chef and daughter, first victims. European fashion billionaire's 3 children. Other Europeans, 2 Australians, Indians, Asians. International help, the local authorities say, is on its way. Headline, 359 gone. Too late, too late. In a country weeks shy of its 10-year anniversary of the end of a civil war. My ancestral country knows too much tragedy. Mass searches continue. Mass funerals begin. Strands of white and black ribbons hang. Sri Lanka quietly fades. Slowly in Sydney's inner west, I pull myself back. Sri Lanka quietly fades, several clicks and flicks away to the back pages. I watch my latte, Glundagal, play barefoot in the park. Thank you.
That was brilliant and moving. So, yeah, I'm very deeply honored to be in this space as well. It looks like there aren't any questions in the chat. So I think we'll probably wrap it up now. So would it be possible to get all the readers on the screen as well? Just shout them out one last time. So these are the amazing readers who read here today. Very grateful for all of them. You can find a lot of their work online on the social media handles, which will which have all been in the comments, or will be found on the Eventbrite page. The donations for the hospital will still be up after this reading until the 10th of December. It's all you can. If you can share anything, that would be, if you can share the page as well, that would be amazing. But yeah, I think that's the end of today's reading. Thank you so much for everyone who joined. We're all very grateful. If any of the readers have anything else to add, I think that's it.
Thanks for having us.